Alrighty. My name is Michael, and it's been about 2 months or so since the last video I've made on Realm, which is the working name for the card game that I've been working on. And I wanted to just kind of do a checkpoint update as far as the design space I've been exploring and some thoughts and inspirations therein. So, there are a few things that I'm going for with Realm that I will lead with. In a nutshell, I play a lot of Commander, and I'm a big fan of multiplayer and multipolar games in general. I think they're very interesting for a number of reasons. And so I ended up kind of setting out to make a novel, keyword novel, game system that is oriented around simultaneous, to some extent, opaque actions. I want it to have global dynamics, so not a game where, for instance, in Vampire Eternal Struggle, there is a circle of combat where each player is being hunted and hunting the players next to them. That is not really what I'm looking for from the game feel experience. So I'm looking for something with multipolar variance. So not only is there variance in the decks themselves, but also in what players bring to the table, and there's multiple things that are being brought to the table. So there's a lot of dynamicism. And one of the design goals, which is not really present in the current design, but I want to make the wins feel big, but I want to make losses feel and be non-binary so that we can mitigate some of the issues that commonly plague multipolar games, where somebody gets knocked out or they realize that they're not in the running anymore. Their actions become arbitrary. There are many games out there that solve this to some extent, so we can borrow some of these concepts. I've ruminated a lot on these kinds of games and what makes them so different and challenging for collectible or trading card games. Essentially, a game where players make something separately and bring it to the table and have a unique game design experience based on the sub-selection of aspects of the game that they're bringing to the table. So there's a kind of conventional wisdom that multipolar games, free-for-all games, are naturally a curse problem, and that is true. They are plagued with issues that one-on-one experiences or team experiences don't have. But there are multipolar games out there that do manage to feel, for the most part, fine. I think in really serious competitive settings, there can be collusion issues, etc. But for instance, there is competitive mahjong and poker, and they survive. They don't. There is, of course, bad beats in every game, but they don't feel inherently flawed in the same way that a kind of commander tournament might feel inherently flawed. So anyways, I put these notes in. So ruminations, we can use opacity and hidden information. Like in drafting games, you are indirectly interacting with everybody, but it feels less like you've been jilted by a incompetent participant if they pick something that they're building towards in their own game plan and you simply misread the signals, for instance. So there is very much a feeling in the competitive space that some multipolar situations are acceptable for competition. In Magic, there is segments of high-level competitive tournaments that are drafting, and drafting is effectively, it leads with a highly dynamic multipolar situation. So these are kind of random, but why is it that we look so differently at the variance in one player's skill versus multiple. I think the biggest thing is, for instance, in Scrabble, turn order can matter a lot, and you're introducing more variance than needs to be there. So there's already the variance of the tiles drawn from the bag in Scrabble, but at high levels of competitive play, the players are interested in testing their ability to navigate the board state and piece together big words. I guess that I'm just winging it. I don't really know much about competitive Scrabble, but in any case, like the same thing happens in Dominion. It's designed to be a multiplayer game, but at the high levels of competitive play, they end up playing two players. That's fine, but essentially these are the same game, and I personally think there is more space in the multipolar realm to view things through a competitive lens. Of course, my go-to example here is Diplomacy is a highly competitive, serious game, and it is inherently multipolar. And I don't think anyone's considering playing one-on-one games of Diplomacy, but maybe that is simply because Diplomacy is a game about politics. So other games don't want to be about politics, so we tend to try and factor them out when we get to really high levels of play to kind of suss out who's working with the game systems the best. But poker is not a political game, and still we have very high levels of competitive play that are multipolar experiences. So I think there is a lot more space here than we really give credit for. And then the last couple things are, if every point matters, then some of these bad situations that the commander player is all too familiar with, or the board game player is all too familiar with, can be mitigated, because you can say, well, this round I'm not going to do as well as the best player, but if I'm taking home a couple points to try and win over the course of, say, 10 games, then that is something. And then lastly, this is unrelated to these other factors, but I'm interested in making a game that can be planned for. So if you want to have a short game, if you want to have a short game of chess, you pull out a clock and you set a timer. And I want that possibility, I want that affordance in a card game with some of the game feel that I love from a multipolar, highly dynamic, different every time game feel. So those are just some loose thoughts. I will go into the kind of history of game ideation I've had thus far for Realm. Now, the first kind of fully fleshed out version of the game that was like theoretically a playable experience was something I call currently the impact site version. This was the first thing I tried to playtest with other people, and it did not go well. The biggest problem, I think, in this version was that the onboard interaction it revolved around these impact sites that players would move to, and this was my attempt at making some chunking so that players didn't have to always be interacting and considering a global state. And long story short, it did not work. There were some properties of it that survived, like the overall casting system. You'll see later is kind of the same. But from this, I started exploring other ideas. And then the next thing that I put in front of people was I tried very hard to not flesh things out as much as I did with the impact site version. The impact site version, I made a rules document, all kinds of things. And then only then did I start playtesting it with myself and go, this is not a good idea. I put it in front of people because I wanted to better understand why other people would find it to be wrong, but I knew it was wrong very deeply. So this next version, I scrapped the impact sites and I said, what if we just had these sets of actions, before there were multiple kind of phases of sub combat, and I removed all that, and I said players are going to have one opportunity to do things a game. So there's casting the spells, and then there's the action phase where players select actions simultaneously and then reveal. And then based on those actions, we figure out who's actually scoring points, if there's combat that happens, etc. So this is kind of the first step towards, it's kind of blurry, but I don't want to get too into the weeds here, but here there was like, you can't see it at all, but basically these little areas were different phases in which the beings were active in, and I scrapped that. And the biggest innovation here was a lesson that I drew from some other games, one of them being Flawed TCG. It's called Flawed. That this could work and not be super clunky is I introduced these stats, the most important one being speed. So instead of saying this card will, you'll cast your cards, and in the previous version, they would have a hard locked phase at which they would enter. Instead, everything has a speed. The faster the speed, the faster the resolution. And then there's like a priority tie-breaking system. But by and large, things, if they go fast, they happen first. And I thought, well, I can throw this on the beings, and they will have, these stats will be relevant. There are these other stats. I don't remember if I really thought this through, but the most important one that I added was this, I called it grasp, but it was basically chips. This was a really bad idea, but I appreciate myself for trying to add the novelty. The concept was that the most important thing was going to be exploration. So the theme of Realm is that there are these new realms of existence entering into the macrocosmos, which is kind of like a multi-dimensional cosmos thing. And each player is sending their beings and resources to explore and claim this realm of existence. And so in this version, there were warp matter chips that you would collect to try and get to 20. And I liked the idea of there being these tactile points instead of just pure victory points. I like the idea of you have this accumulating pot in the center, or you're taking it, but maybe you start with a few, maybe they're also a resource. So these were some of the ideas I was floating around with, or playing around with. So this version of the game, there's some, don't worry about what these words say, but there's like some defense and attack mechanics. There were a lot of problems with this version of the game. The big one right off the bat is these cards they were a static set of actions that you could take every turn. And I was just trying to like experiment with this. I knew this wasn't going to last, but I got 3 of my friends into Tabletop Simulator, and I had to explain to them, you have these 6 cards that are always in your hand, and you can only do one of them a turn. Or you can do like a small subset of them a turn, but they are static actions. And this concept was bad, and the combat system was worse, because each turn any player could decide, I'm going to attack, and they would, because I'm looking for this kind of multipolar, like relatively balanced experience, when they attack, they would attack everyone. And so if they had a big enough creature, they would be like micro wrathing every turn without any limits. So lots of problems with this version. The defense card, I can't even remember exactly what it did, but it didn't defend very well. So I had one of the players, they weren't reading their cards super carefully, but they did the intuitive thing, and they tried to defend against an attack that they knew would wreck their board. And like, instead of even explaining that wouldn't work, I just wrote down, like I wrote in my notes, like, defend should actually do something to defend. It should make sense in some way. That is still a problem that I'm dealing with today. The other two of these actions that are relevant are the banding. So because there was a limited number of actions that you had like a hard lock on the number of things you can do. I was experimenting with bands. They were dynamic. You would have like as many as you want, and you would reorganize them like regularly in order to like achieve something. I don't think I was clear to myself on what it would achieve to realign these bands, other than like to make you better at exploring. Yeah. And in this version, exploring in order to win chips, it was might was the only thing that was used for that. So it was like speed is used for the speed of abilities and the speed of cards. Might is used for actually winning the game, kind of like Riftbound, I think was the main inspiration there of like, just make it might. Might is the thing that you use to win. Chips was like, okay, how much do you win? How much does how much winningness is a card good for? So like if you're more aggressive, you're trying to get away with higher chip beings instead of just dominating the board. And then there was toughness, which like, can you survive? So I'll come back to this later, but I'm still unsure of this. Having these stats were doing, some of them were doing multiple things, and this is a big question for me: is should the stat on a card do multiple things? So, anyways, not to dwell on this too much, but after this version, I started playing around with. I was like, okay, I like this limited action thing, and I got the idea after riffing with some of my playtesters. Maybe I can combine. So there's already a second resource deck, and before it was basically just that didn't exist and this didn't exist. So it was a land, right? And you would get one a turn, and or you would get them in your hand. But I like the idea of having two decks for smoothing the resource curve, but I want to expand on this idea of multiple decks. Instead of putting the resources in an extra deck and just getting them kind of out of the way, which I think that's like very good reasons for doing that. But I'm interested in, like, you have the main deck of tradable and collectible cards. Then you have a second deck of tradable and collectible cards. And they serve two different roles. And like by default, you can opt to have 100% mana curve experience. But maybe there are cards that are worth giving up, like consciously making that decision to give up the consistency of 100% curve, or like they are colorless or they have drawbacks. So I was exploring with this. I made this, and I hated how much text there was on this version of the card. And one thing I was trying to learn from my earlier iteration was go faster. This has been this is me in a nutshell, speaking candidly. I'm very bad at moving quickly, but in this domain, if you're prototyping a card game, I remember I played a playtest with a designer who, like, everyone brought a game. It was in the Distraction Makers Discord, and they had just cards that were just shapes and lines and words, and very simple, just explained what the effects. And they also, I was very intrigued by it because they were also messing with the core casting system that doesn't get messed with much. And that was the main thing in their game. It was the stack in focus, and very good concept. But the thing that really struck me was, it's like, oh, this is how a real designer does it. They just slap together, proof of concept, and they get to plan. So that's something that's, I think, very hard to get used to as I'm kind of a maximalist in my approach to things, a perfectionist, etc. Not good at visualizing unless I've got the art and everything. So anyways, so I was like, okay, let's just go with something iconographic so that I can get a feel for things faster. And so I made in this version, I was considering, okay, first of all, what if we combined the actions and said you can either use this as a resource or use it as an action? And so your resource and actions are part of the same kind of economy deck, and you're getting some of them every turn, and you have to decide how you want to kind of curve out. You have very limited options for working in the world. And taking a step back, the earlier version, all earlier versions, I had said, well, it's not in there, but I had said you start with 2 resources, and one of my playtesters said this feels clunky. And I thought to myself, what if you just were like, if we were combining these things, maybe you're getting 3 of these every turn, but you get to you draw 3 a turn, you get to keep 1 around, so you're building up your curve, but you have to allocate between resources and actions. And I find this kind of compelling. One of the good fruits of doing things with this kind of iconographic, simplistic approach was immediately I went and said explore. So I was removing chips. Chips were no longer good, and I was saying each of the other stats you'll have to balance in order to explore them all. And I said, okay, like there's an explorer for each stat, so you have to balance. Now this gets into kind of a nightmare, because it's like I had 3 of these 3 different stat exploration cards per resource type, and there's only 3 so far, three factions in the game. So there's 9 basic resources, all to do this one action. And like I want there to be, that's a headache. So I said, okay, I got to get the thing that you're exploring and the act of exploration itself. I got to decouple these things somehow. So I come to here, and it's like, okay, so where does the thing that you're exploring go? And I'll go into a bit more depth into the overall game systems in a little bit, but effectively, so people who knew Altered, some of these things will already sound familiar. This was a bad idea, because now there's not enough space. Okay. So if you already know Altered, then some of this exploration stuff might sound familiar. And I decided it would be better if I just took more pages from Altered's book. So in Altered, you have a hero that kind of, the card bifurcates your board. So even if you're playing without a playmat, there's a delineation. Left is one expedition, right is the other. And I've never actually played it. By the way, I don't play many games really, but I've learned about a ton of these games mechanically and systematically and metagame wise from YouTube. Incredible resources out there now for just like, there's such a breadth of games, but also people analyzing these things. I'll shout out later. But so the way it works in Altered is you're exploring the terrain, and you've got your little guy or guys or gals or robots or what have you. And when you play something to an expedition, that contributes to the stats. And so this Yangsu guy is best in the forest, worst in the mountains, and decent at water. So when you're here, he's pretty good. And then if you beat your opponent in any of these stats, then you will be able to move forward. You're competing against your opponent is setting the challenge rating effectively, but you are exploring the terrain, and that is the experience. So that is the flavor. But once he explores this, and let's say he moves down here, now he's worse. So you have to balance your stats across these fields to make sure that you can effectively race across the entirety of the tumult board, and it's shuffled every time, so there's a variance in how you'll explore it. So this is a great system. I don't want to lift it wholesale, but it's also much better suited for a one-on-one experience because the track runs down the center. You can look at multiplayer Altered setups, and it gets pretty complicated. Seems still very fun but it seems very crunchy and very like heavy in the analysis. It has the same similar kind of stack system to Magic, where you're going back and forth, and imagine navigating that, but you've got 3 other players that you're trying to like contest with, all with different tracks. That's a bit too much micro, right? In my view. So the version that I've kind of settled on for now is the players mixed into the resource deck. So already we're expanding the uses of the second deck, which I like. We have these cards that when you first play them, they can give you a resource. So whenever you have them, they're not useless. But when you keep them, instead of becoming your basic lands or your battlefield lands or resources, they stick around in the active terrain. And then your little critters, your beings here on either side, when you warp beings into the realm, or when you resolve your permanence, you have to decide which side that they're going to go on. And this side can only explore speed. So there's I'm trying to achieve this. Remember, we want global dynamics, self-directed chunking. So when a player reveals, players are selecting cards to play simultaneously. But once they're there, you know kind of around the realm of possibility what they might be doing. So once importantly, it's in the interest of speed, I didn't bother with this, but it can be played either direction. So effectively, what all the other players have on the board. You don't have to necessarily crunch the numbers for every possible thing that they might be doing. If you're just trying to trying to explore with speed, you need to beat everyone at speed, like every band on the entire board. You need the max in order to score that point for the turn. And the way that you do so is by playing this resource, saving it for the action phase, and then playing it in the action phase. And that's kind of the overall concept. I haven't done playtesting to validate this, but I feel a lot better about it compared to the prior versions, at least. So, and then each player, well, in order to win the game, you need, I got a dog. In order to win the game, you need to explore 3 of each. So you can't just rely on one stat, or if you're going to rely on one stat, maybe you need some kind of mechanic or trick for extracting them from other players' terrains, or some cards will say you can explore with one stat instead of others to score points. But of course it'll be, that's a matter of balance, is making sure that thing doesn't get out of control. So that's the kind of overall concept. And then there's a little matter of, well, okay, so are you drawing 3 from the resource deck every turn? If you need to be using those resources and using them for every action, that's kind of, I am very interested in resource constraints, but how do you figure out what you want that balance to be? It's still an open question. Maybe this has all been a bit too vague or lack of concrete. So, because I've only talked about the onboard, to me, there's 2 aspects to this game. There's the onboard interaction, which is usually the thing where other games are innovating the most. The other big thing that I am exploring here is simultaneous simultaneous plays, obfuscated plays as a core game system. So when you, even in the action phase, when a player selects the action that a being is going to take, they do so face down. And so you might think they're exploring, but maybe they're playing the move card to kind of zig when you expect them to zag, that kind of thing. The main kind of problem with simultaneous action selection is how many times do players get to, if you want a game of kind of very open-ended complexity, like say Magic or other similar trading card game, players like things to potentially, well, I won't speak for everyone, but complexity is part of the appeal. Is sometimes things get crazy, and you find yourself a narrow way through in a wide complexity space, and that's exciting. So anyway, I like that possibility. So in Realm, there's 4 casting speeds. There's Warp 1. Then they're represented by these diagrams, or at least the first 3 are. There's Warp 1, 2, and 3, and then there's Action. And these are basically the 4 opportunities that players have to play a card, or really do anything in the game. And like after revealing the card, they decide targets and so on and so forth. But the actual playing of cards is only done 4 times a turn by everyone all at the same time. The overall concept here is that Warp 1 is for sorcery speeds and permanents. Warp 2 is for things that can interact, like direct interaction. And then Warp 3 is meta interaction with interaction. And some of those things overlap, but the kind of goal I have here in this casting system is for you to be able to lay out a bunch of answers to potential problems. You just send them all, and then if the players attempt to answer your threats in Warp or what have you, you select which solutions you are going to actually play, and the rest, so that it's not super punishing, go to this drift zone, which is kind of like a soft exile that you can retrieve things from. So I'll go quickly through the kind of use of resources and the way that drift works here. So in this example, our player, we'll call them player, they have sent these 3 cards, and they have this veer, which is, you can think of it as protection in the drift. So because it's Warp 1 and veer is locked to 2 and 3, they couldn't get veer back this phase anyways. So they send this permanent, looks like that. They send this permanent and some resources to pay for it. They pay for their stuff, which they don't actually have to pay for their things. You can send things and not commit them and just let them fall into drift. But in this scenario, they commit them. And then for whatever reason, there's some other interaction coming for their guy. So in Warp 2, you send face down this resource and then reveal it. And this resource has the drift icon that lets them get something back from drift. So even getting things back from this kind of soft exile zone requires interaction with this resource system, and you have to decide, do you want to hold on to these things or not? What I mean by that is at the end of every turn, players, even if you didn't spend a resource in your hand, the things that you only get to keep 1 resource per turn. So you're smoothly building up your curve, and then everything else, if it's in your hand, you can just keep it there, or you can pitch it, which this idea comes from Flesh and Blood. But everything you used as an action and everything that you're not holding on to, it's going to the bottom of the resource deck, and then you're drawing back up to 3. So you always have it. You always start the round with 3 resource/actions in your hand. So maybe you want to hold on to things, but if you hold on to things, you're sacrificing some theoretical tempo advantage, or very real tempo advantage, actually. So this is kind of the overall game system, and I'll talk some about inspirations and thoughts that I'm having for minutia. I think the main thing is I need to get this in front of people and play testing. Some thoughts and inspirations. So I mentioned maybe before Flesh and Blood. I'm very interested in novelty in game systems. So a lot of games have variations on a theme of magic. Maybe we introduce a couple zones, or we like swap out the combat mechanism, but the overall structure is very much like Magic, or the overall structure is, I think creature battlers are their own kind of thing, and they seem very interesting as well. But that's not really my wheelhouse. But Flesh and Blood and Altered, they're kind of my two biggest inspirations beyond Magic right now, because they came along and they did just crazy innovative things. The Flesh and Blood big thing to me is you draw up to hand size every turn, so that's where I got the inspiration for the resource up to hand size. And they do every card as a resource, but you're pitching to the bottom of the deck instead of to the instead of resourcing cards. The competitive scene of Flesh and Blood likes this. It's kind of lower or more controlled variants in a way, and it has a very kind of like fluid feel. And I think there's an element of this game that it's the kind of thing that I'm not sure I'm going to be able to pack in. You don't want to be trying to do too many things at once, but in the roguelike genre, you're churning through your deck, and in the deck builder like Dominion, this feeling of churning through your deck as you're refining an engine, I think is a very interesting and like exhilarating game feel as things are changing all the time. And I think there's a great amount of intrigue to me in, can a more classical paper trading card game have this element of fluidity, of rapidity in the deck kind of wielding experience that is done so well in the roguelike genre. And again, I don't think that I'm going to get there with Realm. I think Realm's already trying to do kind of too much at the end of the day, but I think there is potential for this. One of my biggest concerns around this concept, this system of draw 3, go to the bottom, draw 3, one of my biggest concerns is that it feels clunky to have two decks. One you're drawing from normally, one you're churning through Flesh and Blood style. One idea is to make drawing from the main deck its own action. Maybe things are getting a bit extreme, but if it was a elegant unified system, that's kind of, there would be one action deck, and you would just, that would be the core loop, and that's everything comes from that one action deck. That's kind of interesting to me. That would be inverting the usual relationship of extra and main deck. To me, is usually the extra deck is kind of auxiliary or extensions of cards rather than, or just a simple resource deck, whereas this would be like the main thing is your resource deck, and then you're pulling stuff out of your main deck in order to actually play the game. So, but you have to spend resources to do it. So that's an idea. Other influences. So before tackling those, I'll just return to Altered again. Again, Altered, huge inspiration. The Reserve is another area of Altered that is a big inspiration so far. Of course, they have very different utilization of the Reserve versus my Drift Zone, which is, I think I put it here. The Drift Zone is more of an oopsie zone than a reserve, but it's nonetheless, I think it's kind of in a similar spirit of like, what happens if we have a kind of like halfway hand or something. I mean, in Altered, they have a lot of interesting innovations. They clear the board by just everything leaves at the end of the round, but some of the stuff you keep around in the reserve. Really impressive how this system kind of came together in such a cohesive way. I when I'm thinking about design for this game recently, a lot of times I kind of like reflect and look at Altered. Realm is going to be complicated. I tend to make complicated things, and there's a real risk of fiddliness, of cruftiness. And I think Altered, maybe they push the limit a little bit with the tumult and the little like pawns that you're moving around. But ultimately, I think it really came together in a very impressive, sleek, and cohesive package for how much is going on in this game. So other inspirations or considerations, Algomancy was recommended to me by a friend when I was talking about simultaneous action. In Algomancy, they have a simultaneous or semi-simultaneous multiplayer combat selection thingy. But overall, it's a very interesting project, very kind of mind-bending. They have an integrated draft into the game. The place where it's really relevant to Realm is that when I started to think of this multiple resources a turn idea, in Algomancy, they have affinity instead of mana cost. Well, they have a cost and then an affinity. And this card here, for example, it only costs 1, but you have to have 2 affinity in play in order to play it. And this, I haven't bothered really considering this deeply yet, but this would be a very nice fit to the kind of unevenness of you right off the bat, you start with 3 resources, but you don't always have access to 3 resources depending on what you're trying to do. So, and some of them are in different zones. I think that would lend itself well to the kind of Algomancy affinity. I think there's another game, I can't remember the name of the other game that has done this in the past, also made by a previously serious Magic player, of course. And then the other kind of inspiration is Riftbound. Less of Riftbound can be seen in Realm now because I no longer have intermediate locations. I'm trying to chunk things based on kind of the stat terrain is the term I'm currently using. But Riftbound, I could see myself kind of experimenting with in Riftbound the power cost of a card. So this costs 2 you tap 2 to play it, but then you have to sack a red. So or you recycle it. So you're losing resources in order to play things. I think that could be pretty interesting, especially because in Realm, if I stick with this kind of hybrid resource action system, you might want to get an action back and get it back to in your circulation. So that's an idea. And then this is a flawed TCG. I had considered the idea of this speed. So I'm not a fan of this kind of sideways text, but they have these different stats, and the speed I had thought of before, but I kind of didn't. I had low conviction in speed as an idea, and I watched some video on it and decided to come back to it in place of having multiple phases. There's just one resolution phase. I think hopefully that's going to be cleaner, but it is less. It's trading the complexity of multiple phases of doing stuff for the complexity of holding an entire flow of resolution in your head. So maybe I'll have to find some balance between those two things again. But this is kind of there's kind of there's very few free lunches in design space. Last things I'll talk about. We're already talking about speed and priority. So these are some cards that I made recently or kind of rolled into the game recently. The speed system, obviously, if two things have the same speed, then how do you decide what goes first? Currently, I'm saying if A targets B, by default, A goes before B. And then there's also a priority chip, and that acts as both when you reveal things and have to make decisions, the person with priority goes first. I've been playing with expanding on this concept. For instance, this guy, I wanted him to have this really strong dodge effect where he can give this is kind of the sky faction, and he's synergizing with the birds by making it so that they can avoid things or avoid getting attacked or whatever. And some of these keywords aren't rules texted yet. There's a good quote from some alpha Magic playtesters where they would ask Richard Garfield how certain cards worked, and Richard would just say, "How do you think it works? How do you think it should work?" And because he didn't know yet, and I think that's like, and you look at the complexity and the level of iteration, the different versions of game systems that Magic has gone through. I think that it really shows, and it goes to show that like this kind of scrappy designer mentality is very valuable, because if you are trying to, if you feel like you have to understand literally everything that you're designing for, then I mean, if you're going for kind of simplicity constraints, that's good, but there's a lot to do in the early phases of a game. I think especially with the standards as they are today, and being okay with things being kind of like sloppy initially, I think is very important. Anyways, the priority system, I have been leaning into the idea of there kind of being a soft player one where, or a soft primary turn where the player with the priority chip, their abilities are stronger, they can do more things, and most importantly, the kind of so these stats, each stat does currently two main things. One, speed determines how fast it can act in the resolution phase. Might is how strong it attacks for, and toughness is how much it can withstand in damage, right? So like spells can deal damage, or events can deal damage, and so on and so forth. But importantly, one of the things I found in the earlier brief playtest with attack and defend is there's a really high, sorry, the dog is freaking out because I'm talking into a microphone. There's a really high barrier to the attacking has a very high cost because you're putting your guy at risk against three other opponents at once, and it's also a massive threat to be omnipresent, that somebody's going to, because it's attacking, there's no life point, so it's just you're attacking, you're going to hit one of their beings and remove one of their targeted combo pieces. So the way that this kind of works now is there's this combat act, which is either a colorless resource or you're going to send somebody to combat. If it's played with priority, then they are attacking, and attackers don't take damage, they only deal damage. And if it's played as without priority, you are defending, so you can send your big meat shield in the way to prevent yourself from losing an important piece of your explore team or your synergy engine or what have you. One of the reasons this is iconographic is so that I can experiment with different, like, I suspect that defend is currently too weak and that it needs to be they block some of the damage and then take damage, or something along those lines. But in essence, I've been experimenting with this kind of having the priority makes you a little bit of an arch enemy. Maybe you're going to like nuke everyone because you have the advantage of the priority, and it comes at this cost of like you can't be reactive with the priority because you are assigning targets before everyone else as things are. I guess I didn't go into that much detail, but after you reveal the actions, first the priority player decides what targets their effects have, and then you go in a circle. So it has a kind of inherent downside there, and this can be a kind of way of just building that into the game. It's asymmetric based on turn, and you have to be considering your position from all these different angles. I think the big risk to me with this combat, so not specifically this combat, but having combat at all, is everything does two things. So this brings me to kind of this last kind of rumination, is these stats all do two things, and they are kind of, they might be in conflict with each other. And altered, the explore stats, that's all that they are, right? And then you can get a boost, or you have effects that interact with them, but they're doing one thing, and they're doing one thing well. And here we have like this guy's ability is very slow because they're slow when they're exploring, and even the events, they have a speed. So because you need to have things resolve, right? So everything has a speed. So like speed limit, does that mean that beings have a speed limit because you don't want them to go faster than your fastest instance? Or is that like part of is that a feature, not a bug? Is that some things are moving so fast that you can't catch them, or I mean, speed isn't like, it doesn't protect you. So in flawed, like you can't react to something with a faster speed. It's not quite that strong here. Being faster doesn't mean you'll always avoid the interaction. It just means that you're going to be able to, like, if you can do something, you can do it faster. So it's also like, right now I've been meddling with +1/+1 counters. Awkward, right? Because like there's 3 stats. So what are they? They're plus +1/+1 counters, but I don't know if speed's going to get the kind of boosts that might and toughness get. I mean, you can always make a bigger robot, but you can always make a bigger monster, but can they always go faster and faster and faster? So maybe there's like value in the asymmetry, or maybe it's a limited design space. And maybe, part of me wants to say, like, in a game like D&D, the stats are doing all kinds of random things. But this isn't D&D. This is a tabletop game. So there's these competing priorities, and you want to make things as simple as possible. And as a designer, it's easy to try and trick yourself into believing that you've made things simpler. But in reality, you've made them more complicated by packing more functionality into the same surface area. And, I could even say the same, some similar things about the warp system. The warp phases, I'm a little iffy on, but I won't go yet too into it. And then I guess the one kind of like, can I get rid of one number? Getting rid of chips was relieving. Now it's just you score 3 of the stats, and you can use the cards themselves to, not the cards in your deck, but you can use the same cards to keep track currently. So I felt pretty good about that. I think it's definitely the right direction to be moving in. Maybe one question is going to be like, should it be 2 terrain stats on a card, or is it 1 each? Maybe this is worth more experimentation. I'm not sure. So is multi-purpose stats interesting or a mistake? Can I fold main draw into the resource system? It's interesting questions. Something I didn't really mention, didn't really have a place here, but there are these like main deck acts right now, and this is kind of a theoretical question, because when I designed this act, there's only one, like acts would only be in the main deck, but if they're primarily in the resource deck, the bluffing potential I think is eroded a little bit if they are also in the main deck, or maybe there's like a fluidity to them, and you have like a whole range of things that you can do across both decks. It could be interesting. I'm not so sure where I'm going to go with this, and I'm not so sure. Back to coupling. If a being is untapped, in order to participate in exploration, a being has to be untapped, and I don't know if every act is going to tap. I don't know if this act should tap the being, if it's too much of a cost. There's all kinds of questions when you're dealing with kind of all these moving pieces of a system. So this whole thing is kind of a little on the back burner. I don't think it's necessary for the core elements of the game, but I am interested in this, like, just taking everything and making it a card. Kind of, this is one of the ways I hope to zag where Magic zigs, is Magic puts more and more spells on creatures, so they're double cards. And what if we take abilities off of creatures and make them their own cards? I think this is an interesting concept. So anyways, sorry if my voice is rough. I've been sick last couple days. I'll kind of wrap this up. The kind of postscript here. Shout outs to the Kevin Code YouTube channel and Card Crypt. Especially Card Crypt for making so many gameplay videos. It really helps to osmose a lot of design space from across the kind of ecosystem through these kind of like short tutorial games. And it really gives a breadth of, I know like most of those inspirations I listed were very mainstream games, but or, you know, in the scheme of these things, relatively mainstream games, but osmosing different ideas and like seeing the way that like I think that the new what is that cryptid game that Richard Garfield redesigned. I liked seeing that redesign gameplay video a lot, and these things can be very abstract and inspiration, like just the concept of simplicity and sticking to a theme or a design, and then also to the main reason I mentioned both of these guys is I joined the Indie TCG Discord thing. I'll post this in there, of course, and I think Kevin Code in particular had a video on we should be, as a community, one of the problems, I mean, I think this happens in a lot of creative endeavors, is not collaborating enough. That's something that I struggle with a lot. And this project ultimately, you know, I've enjoyed making some of the art for my little lads, you know, but ultimately, like, getting this together, it's fun, but this isn't really what I want the game to look like as much as I like the way it looks right now. I think it's at the very least serviceable, and I'm like holding my own in kind of conveying the vibe of the world that I'm going for. But eventually I would like this, if this project continues, I would like to engage artists or engage other designers, or collaborate with them in some capacity. I do think, like, you know, of course you can't just say like we should all be collaborating. That's a very hard thing to do, especially to line up the like incentives and the level of passion, interest. All these things are challenging, but I would like to do more of that. If you happen to be interested in getting, I think one of the challenges is, if you're interested in doing this kind of thing, you probably have your own vision. It's hard to sway that kind of thing. I mean, I'm hardly interested in working on any other like game concept other than the thing that I have in my mind. And I think a lot of creative folks are like that. So, but nonetheless, I would like to collaborate at some point, and I'm not super rigid on some of these things. Although I do have a lot of kind of, have been writing some lore, and such. I do like writing and world building and that kind of thing. Other channels that I wanted to shout out are Kodok has given me a lot of appreciation for the kind of craft and materials in this, the kind of pure product aspects. I mean, in addition to his gameplay analysis videos, a video on the magic color pie and what really boiled down to drink from another well. I think that was a video I watched that really, like, I mean, I was kind of looking for it, but it very much helped push me in other directions. I know like a lot of the frame design or like the some of the like origins of this are very clearly magic driven, but I think it's currently set up to depart from that a great deal if it wants to. And then LC has been good recently. He does a lot of like meta game analyses, and it's given me more appreciation for games that beyond my kind of like normal wheelhouse. And then TCG Academia has some good videos on like the fundamental things you need to understand. If that's where you come to this video from, they're a very good resource. And then what are these other things that I was going to say? Yes. Yeah, I think the thing that there's nothing wrong with variations on a theme or exploring design space in similar frames to other games like Magic, etc., etc. Personally, particularly interested in the pursuit of true novelty in most things. This is kind of, I would say, a theme that drives a lot of my work interests or professional-esque interests. And that sucks a lot. It sucks to be doing that because there's a reason certain things haven't been explored. There's a good GDC game design talk on like cursed design problems, and free for all is very much a cursed design problem. I think simultaneous action is a very challenging design problem as well. So what I currently have with Realm is something of like a light programming game, which programming games are where you plan all of your actions in advance. It's a little like a programming game. It's a little like a simultaneous action game. It's a little bit of a bluffing game. And it's a whole lot of Magic-esque stuff and Altered-esque stuff. These little things of like, am I being too creative? I think, but it's to me, it's very much worth it. And I very much admire that others in the space have clearly managed, like in Altered and in Flesh and Blood's case, obviously managed to carve out novelty in the design space. And I will say, I think it's more likely that you're going to make a bad game if you're pursuing something that is purely novel, or you're pursuing a totally original concept. But when you pursue true novelty, you can target a game feel that doesn't exist yet. And I think that has a lot to do with both of those games' success. With the player base, Altered had its own problems, but Flesh and Blood brought a new game system, a fundamentally new game engine to the TCG space, and they were rewarded for it. And Altered did something similar. So I think novelty is very hard to, like, the inspiration for it is hard. The iteration on it is harder. You're going to have lots of really bad ideas if you're pursuing true novelty. And it's certainly not like I'm one to be giving advice on these things, but I find it very, I don't know, we'll see where this project goes, but I find it very engaging personally. And then just a bit about me. I mean, you know, maybe you know me, maybe you don't, but I mentioned before, I would eventually like to collaborate with others on this project. I don't know if I have the stamina for the real meat of mechanics and set design that is really necessary to make a truly good game. And I think that's something that, like, you know, let alone, like, I think I could get by with this art probably, but like I said before, this is not my vision for how it looks ultimately. I would eventually like to collaborate on this thing if it continues. It's not really, I mean, it has kind of been my main project for the last couple months, but getting to this last point, like, it's not my main project because I am a aspiring career designer. So I don't really know exactly what the fate of it is going to be. Like, I am a software engineer by trade, if you couldn't have guessed. But the I think it might be at the point where I could pull off a full game. Yeah, so I don't know what the next steps are here or what really my priorities are. Regardless of the direction I go with this project in the future or how long it endures or what state it matures to, um, it's been very interesting. I've learned about a lot of areas. Certainly, I've made more digital art than any time in my life, and it's fun to see this cohere together in a way that seems like something could actually work. Um, I think one thing that I kind of wonder is maybe I'll drop the simultaneous nature of it at some point if it really keeps going. Maybe simultaneous action is simply not worth it. But anyways, if for some reason, somebody's very interested in getting involved in the project in some capacity, hit me up in the Discord, basically. Yeah, that's about all I got for this devlog. What I'll leave with is, hopefully, if you are watching this, you will end up playing Realm before the third devlog. Otherwise, I'm not doing my job. So, but with that, have a good one. Thanks for watching my little video. Let me know your thoughts. Bye.